It is time to share with you my second COVID experience. Many of you will remember the first time I had those of you who watch our videos will remember that the first time I had it, I actually got it in Las Vegas. What happens in Vegas shows up on lab tests. I've been saying that for years, and it happened to me. It was a COVID test that it showed up on. And this time, we had my daughter's wedding a little bit over a week ago, and nobody, as far as we knew, had symptoms of COVID. But after the wedding, about 3 days later, people start having symptoms, and we've had at least 7, if not more, people. So I just heard of another one today, an 8th person having symptoms that are could be COVID symptoms. And what we found is that when we test, we are not seeing COVID tests come up positive easily. For example, I took a home test, as many people do, that later are showing up positive on a PCR test when they were negative on the home antigen test. Not only that, but both Leanne and myself had PCR tests early when we had the symptoms that were negative, and we stayed at work because our PCR test was negative. It's supposed to be the more sensitive of the two. And of course, the home antigen tests were negative. And it wasn't until the second time taking it, which they recommend doing it at 48 hours, and Leanne did at 48 hours and was positive. And so I did it the very next day when I was at work and found that I was positive also with COVID. So unfortunately, we were at work last week when we were symptomatic, not having a test confirming that we had COVID. Once we had the positive test, we were out of there. We were no longer at work. We were isolating, thankfully together. It's kind of nice to not be alone when you're in isolation. That would be true isolation, wouldn't it? So it's not solitary confinement, but it's isolating with each other. We're able to do it at home. We give ourselves permission to walk outside without interacting with other people. Of course, we would wear a mask if somebody got near us and tell them we have COVID, and be outside. There's lots of ventilation outside. Very low risk for transmission, especially if you're keeping your distance apart and you're wearing a mask and you're telling people stay away, unclean. So thankfully, we've had minimal talking. I think we talked to 2 people total outside, apart from each other. We're wearing the mask, and so keeping that to an absolute limit. Ideally, you wouldn't even have that close of contact. Just be completely away from other people, talking to them across the street if you're talking to people in person. Otherwise, keep it to the phone, please. And neither of us took any antiviral medication because neither of us have conditions for which Paxlovid has been found to be beneficial. And there's a list of that. You can find it at auburnmedicalgroup.com/COVID-conditions, and that will show you those conditions for which Paxlovid is thought to be beneficial for, and some of those that there's conflicting data or just not enough data for things like asthma or hypertension. People can still, I guess, justify doing it for those because there's not data showing that it's not specifically helpful, or not a lot of data on that. And of course, that list could change over time. This now is Omicron. The Omicron variant is what I got early on back in January of 2022, and this is another variant of the Omicron variant. We are hoping for an Omicron-specific vaccine to be available to people in October or November. Hopefully it won't be later than that, but it could be. They're working on it. The companies that brought you the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, are working on a Omicron-specific vaccine, and of course I will be getting that when it's available. I did get the 4th shot, the second booster, back in April, and then came down with COVID here in August. And it was 3 or 4 days after the wedding I started getting symptomatic. Oh, I need to go over how you know when it's time to go back. So we want people to count the first day of symptoms if they have symptoms, and we'll focus on that because that's the example that we have here. You have symptoms, call that day 0. Day 0. regardless of when your test turns positive. If you have symptoms and then you have a couple tests and then the test turns positive, like 3 days after the symptoms start, you count day 0 as the day symptoms started. And then day 1 would be the day after day 0. And then through day 5, you need to be in isolation, not being around other people unless they're isolating with you with COVID. And if you are going to be anywhere near people, it being outdoors, masked with them away from you, big open area. Let them know so they can take their own precautions as they wish to be away from you. But preferably not even doing that, just staying at home. And then on day 6, you can go out with a mask if your symptoms have been improving and you're not having a fever anymore. And preferably that would be at least 24 hours. And then you have to do that until day 10, and then you're no longer required to do it. Now, if you are having a resurgence of symptoms after having that time of symptoms improving, the recommendation is that you retest. So many times it's going to be positive if you retest. So I try to discourage people from retesting to see if they're clear, although they say 2 negative tests are kind of the standard, and that can be the home tests. It's just too hard with the retesting. Even though the CDC has a way that allows for it, I discourage retesting unless you're seeing if you're having a resurgence of it, a relapse like people sometimes will get on COVID. In fact, President Biden had a relapse of COVID on or after having had the Paxlovid, and you treat it the same. You go, okay, what was the day of the onset of symptoms or the exacerbation of the symptoms? Call that day 0. Stay isolated for another 5 days, counting the day 1 is after day 0, the start of the symptoms, and then wearing a mask for 5 additional days for a total of 10 days of mask wearing before kind of going back to normal life. So I wanted to cover that. There's also a great link in the description to South Dakota's health department. They have a great calculator where you put in the day of your onset of symptoms, or if you had a positive COVID test without symptoms, the date of your positive COVID test. You have your choice of which part of their website to use for that. Hope this has been helpful to you. Those of you who have been watching us for years and say, I don't get your videos anymore. We're making videos weekly. Yeah, it's YouTube. You have to push that bell icon, tap the bell icon, click the bell icon, and you'll be able to enable the notifications so you can see our live videos that we're doing weekly. You can even watch them live and chat in during. In fact, we're doing one the day after I put this video out, which will be on a Monday at 4:30, and you can watch us talk about the same topic, but you'll be able to chat with us as we're having the conversation, both myself and Dr. Gwen. Until next time, Dr. Mark Vaughn telling you to stay in good health.